So, welcome to STEM Buddy's first workshop for our research symposium. My name is Tiffany, and I am the Vice President of STEM Buddies. And today I will be leading our workshop. We also have a guest speaker, Ananya, who will be speaking closer to the end of the session. So, please give her a warm welcome. We also have our operations leader, Leslie, with us today. So, also be sure to give him hi or a thumbs up in the chat when he helps out with the workshop as well. So we'll get started. The session is recorded, so if any of your team members couldn't make it to today's session, they can access the link to the recording on our Google Classroom. So STEM Buddies, just for our orientation, for orientation purposes, STEM Buddies is a nonprofit organization aimed at providing accessible mentorship, hands-on learning, and real-world STEM opportunities. And obviously, we hold our research workshop as a part of that mission. And the co-presidents, unfortunately, they're not here today, but they are Zane and Monica, and they will likely be your first line of contact in the Google Classroom. That's where you will be assigned different assessments and tasks leading up to your abstract. And obviously on the right, that's me. And just before we begin our workshop today, we'd like to begin the session with an icebreaker. So just feel free to unmute or pop your answer in the chat to the following question. If you could be any character from a book, show, or movie, who would you be and why? So we'll just give you a few moments to answer. So a lot of great choices. We have Katniss Everdeen. I think the Hunger Games series is currently expanding, so that's a great pick. We have Iron Man, Anna from the book My Sister's Keeper. I've seen a couple previews of the movie. It's a very like moving book as well. I think there are a lot of deep thematic scenes in there. You have Christina Yang, Spider-Man choices, Sophia, Daniel, oh, Gregory from Diary of a Wimpy Kid, because he's funny and doesn't have any real problems. That is such a valid answer. Yeah, so if you guys don't have any more answers, we will continue moving on to the next slide. So for our tentative schedule, obviously today, on the 20th, we have our orientation and introduction to research workshops. So every Thursday, Monday, and Monday, we will be releasing our other workshops and those will be recorded. So this is the only workshop that is live, and you will be receiving a link to those in the Google Classroom as well. With the exception of Thursday, August 6th. So for that workshop, it will be live because you'll be doing a peer review and feedback session. And on the Monday after, so on August 10th. Our seventh workshop will be reserved for practicing your presentations. So I would encourage all of your group members to come to that session because you'll be practicing for your live presentations. So for logistics specifically, our symposium is planned to be on the second or third week of August. We're currently looking to book a location in downtown Toronto, and the time should be between 11 to 4, but both the location and time have not been settled yet. So we'll send everybody a Google form and confirmation when we have our location set in stone. So the Google form will just be for everybody to reconfirm if they can come to the in-person symposium. And for themes and topics, so every participant has already been assigned a group, and this was based on your chosen topics of interest in the sign-up form, and it's up to you guys to pick a specific theme under the broader topic of AI and mental health. So to begin, our the outline of the entire symposium essentially is to come up with a specific topic. So for example, if you're focusing on modulating sleep to improve mental health, you would come up with something that is similar to developing a certain device to address sleep apnea, improving mental health, and if that's meant for improving mental health outcomes in patients. And then you would do online research to back up your proposal, and then you would put that in a specific proposal format, like the one to your left on the screen. And then your proposal paper will be published on the STEM Buddies website. And if possible, we will be presenting that to a panel of professors and PhD students at the in-person symposium. So for our learning objectives for this specific workshop, we'll be covering an introduction to science, an introduction to research, data science, and then research tools. And then to the right are some sort of big picture questions that you guys should be thinking about as we go through today's workshop. So let's start with introduction. So we'll be starting with introduction to science. So science specifically is an organized and logical use of evidence to increase your knowledge of the natural world. And four key components of good science is ensuring that you're using facts over opinions, your research is evidence-based, you're approaching science with a logical and objective perspective, and you're also looking to create replicable results. So these are key points that you should keep in mind when you're conducting your literature research. So just a couple misconceptions about science. So a lot of people think science is only analytical and lacks creativity. However, creative thinking is needed to further science. So obviously you can't be 100% objective when it first comes to developing new ideas. You also need creative thinking, and you also need to sort of think out of the box. Another misconception is that science is a linear and straightforward process as dictated by the scientific method. So the scientific method is just a generalization of how knowledge is acquired. Truthfully, research and science and new discoveries, the process is not always straightforward. People can circle back to different steps. Oftentimes, it's not just like a linear line. And a third misconception about science is that it proves ideas. So science is actually not definitive. It actually just merely accepts or rejects ideas. So on to our introduction to research. So research is a process of steps used to investigate or study a subject. So that's a little bit different from the definition of research. So science is essentially a body of knowledge, whereas research is the process used to extend that knowledge. So here's the scientific method or research pipeline that you will likely be using when you're developing your abstract. So you would first formulate a question. So you would brainstorm questions about the certain subject or topic you're interested in, and then so for example, going back to AI and mental health, if you have a specific topic that you and your team want to focus on, then you would produce a list of questions. And then from that list of questions, you would essentially choose your like a question that you're most interested in, and then you would formulate your hypothesis around that question. And you would perform a literature research proposal, and you would do a search of the literature and develop a hypothesis. And then you would test the hypothesis by performing experiments or looking through online research. And then you would analyze experimental data, such as statistics from certain sources online, and then you would report and share your findings in your proposal. So obviously, when you're looking at research, when you're developing your proposal, you want to make sure that it's suitable to your needs. And to do that, you would use the CRAP method. So when you're looking at a specific article, for example, that you want to use to prove your hypothesis or to develop your sorry, I forgot the word. Your your paper, essentially, your abstract, sorry, you would use the CRAP method. So you would assess whether or not the source is up to date. Then you would look at whether or not the source provides the right information. Then you would think about who created the source. So is the person an accredited author, or are they a well-known researcher? Um, and you would also ask if the author is an institution or an expert. Then you would assess whether or not the information can be verified by other sources. So, are the findings in that paper accurate compared to other things on the internet or through other research articles? And then you'd look at the purpose of the paper to make sure that um, the source wasn't developed for profit or persuasion. So moving on to types of data sources, you would use primary and you will likely use primary and secondary data sources when you are developing your abstract. So a primary source is when a researcher gathers information by themselves. So for example, that would include official records, statistical data, and personally conducted interviews. Secondary data is information gathered by other people. So this would be, for example, like systematic reviews. So if you're looking at an article and a researcher has drawn on other sources and they're summarizing that information, that is likely a secondary source. Whereas if you looked at a paper where the researchers specifically state how they recruited participants or how they analyzed data, and they have specific ways of developing statistics, then that would likely be a primary source. And some examples of secondary sources would be websites, books, and journal articles. So for your proposal specifically, you won't be expected to gather data by yourself. So instead, you will search for pre-existing data, and then your abstract will technically be a secondary source. So obviously, there's a lot of information in research articles. They're very lengthy and highly detailed, so they can be difficult to navigate. So we'll tell you which parts to focus on to simplify reading so you don't have to look over everything. So the first step that you should use when you're reading an article is to just skim the entire structure. So you should pay attention to key terms as well. So for example, if you're looking into, let's say, AI to help with depression, you might look at specific terms relating to I guess, mental health or specific AI platforms as well. So those are just some keywords you would want to pay attention to when you're looking at an article, just to make sure that it will support your abstract or your findings. And then you'd probably try and see what the article is about and keep any significant findings on your tabs. And then you would look at the abstract, and that provides a very quick overview. So if you're just looking for a really quick summary, you don't want to read the whole thing, the abstract is where you should go. You should also read through carefully to make sure that the article has the information you're looking for. Again, you can do that when you're skimming the article, but the abstract really narrows things down for you as well. Some proposals may only have an abstract, so pay attention to that as well. So then you would look at the introduction of the article, which provides some background information about the subject matter. So, for example, if you're looking to define what depression is, then that would likely be at the beginning. Maybe you're looking at a very specific type of depression, like major depressive disorder. That would also be defined in the beginning, and it would likely be abbreviated as MDD. And then if you're already familiar with definitions and the general scope of mental health, then you can skip the introduction. So for after the introduction, you would look at methods. So that section of a research article contains detailed information about how experiments were conducted. If you're looking at primary research, that will likely be extremely detailed because the recruitment process for primary articles is generally more intensive than secondary articles. And you can also skim the methods unless you're looking to replicate experiments, because again, it is very detailed. However, the methods will give you information on whether or not it is a primary or secondary source. So if you're looking to if you want to figure that out, you should look at the method section. So after methods, you should look at the results section. And this is an extremely important part of a scientific article. Essentially, that's where all the good stuff is. It contains all the data from experiments, and oftentimes this will also be where the researchers discuss their findings and what you can extrapolate from what they've discovered throughout the entire study process. There will often be diagrams, visualizations, and numerical findings that you can use to help strengthen your proposal. And of course, after results, then you'll have your discussion where, of course, authors provide their interpretation of their results. And they also disclose weaknesses of a study or whether or not the experiment was compromised in any way. So the results and discussion would probably be the most important aspect of an article when you're trying to find information to support your abstract. So, moving on to how to develop a research question. So, first of all, choose a specific topic under mental health you are interested in. So, you should do a literature review of the topic using reputable websites like PubMed, Google Scholar, ResearchGate, and library journal, etc., and make sure there is enough information to support your abstract. And based on the information you find, ask yourself what you would like to learn more about, and then you should make your your research question as specific as possible. So, for example, focus on niche populations and study factors. So, for example, again, another mental health example, instead of saying the implications of this drug on depression, you should be more specific and say things like the implications of escitalopram, for example. That's just one drug used to treat depression on patients with bulimia. So that's a mental health disorder that is highly associated with major depressive disorder. So we recommend that you get as specific as possible so your abstract can be focused and you'll likely find helpful information that really backs up what you're trying to get across. So again, answering why you want to be specific, it simplifies answering questions, and it also helps you focus your abstract as well. So it comes across as stronger. So another example from last year, one specific question, such as what is the effect of hyperlipidemia drugs in adults, is a very broad research question. For example, and one of the reasons why that's very broad is that there are many different types of hyperlipidemia drugs. So that includes statins, PCSK9 inhibitors, etc. And your study population is also extremely broad. So adults include anybody above 18, and you also have different genders and varying health conditions. and accounting for so many differences is confusing and complicated. So, one way to sort of eliminate confusion and all that background noise when you're doing research is to make your research question specific. So, a better question would be, what is the impact of atorvastatin 80 on seniors with hypercholesterolemia? And then your study population would be age 65 plus. It allows for more streamlined work. So you have a specific population, so adults over the age of 65. Then you have a specific type of hyperlipidemia. And you're also focusing on a specific drug. So in this case, atorvastatin would obviously be a statin. So some other considerations for research questions. You should consider the finer methods. So when you're developing your research question, you should see if it sort of falls under these five categories. So you should ask yourself, is your research question feasible? So can it be answered with available literature? Is your research question interesting? Is it intriguing to your team and the scientific community? You should also ask if your research question is novel. So does it attempt to fill any knowledge gaps in science? You should ask if it's ethical. So does your research question respect participants and minimize potential harm? Or are there any ethical concerns regarding your topic of study? And you should also ask if your research question is relevant. So does it attempt to make a beneficial impact to science and the public? So you can read more in the article here. We'll give you a link to the slideshow so you can access that as well. So then we'll go into our data science section. So data science is extremely important in research because it's part of the research pipeline, specifically step 4, which is analysis. And data analysis requires an objective framework to determine attributes of a specific set of data. So you will not need to interpret data per se, but you can if you want to, and you can derive statistics if you want to. This is just a general way for you to understand a lot of the research out there, because a lot of the times you will see a statistical phrase known as p is less than 0.05. So this determines if there is statistical significance when you're looking at a research article. So I'll give you an example. So if you're let's say you have a new drug and you're trying to see if that drug is effective on patients with a certain mental health disorder compared to a drug that has already been on the market. So if P is less than 0.05, that means your new drug does produce statistical significance, which means that it is effective for whichever population you're testing it on. If it's, I believe if it's greater than 0.05, that means it doesn't make any differences that, I guess, insinuate that it is effective. So that's really all there is to it. So just remember that P less than 0.05 is very common in research articles, and you'll likely come across that when you're looking at different articles as you develop your abstract and work on the proposal with your group mates. And outliers are not particularly important for your this research program, so don't worry about that. So again, data science and statistics also supply the numerical insights needed to report findings quantitatively. And it's very important because without numbers, a report would only make general claims. So your supporting evidence would be weak. A research article would be vague and ambiguous, and that would decrease the credibility of your work. So for example, when you're looking at a study other than statistical significance, I guess phrases like P is less than 0.05, you should also look at facts or numbers or percentages that make the report objective and clear. That signals that it's a reliable source and that you can use it to sort of back up your abstract. So for example, um, when you are developing your abstract, you should be very specific with the statistics that you've come across in your research. So, for example, you should state the study demonstrates that 85% of participants saw at least a 61% reduction in LDL cholesterol levels within 7 days of taking atorvastatin 80. That is better than saying many patients saw a reduction in LDL levels after taking atorvastatin 80 because the aforementioned one is more specific. It draws on actual findings from research articles. So just keep that in mind as you're developing your abstract. And yeah, so we'll move on to our fourth section, which is Introduction to Research Tools. So again, when you're looking for credible literature research, you should two really good sources is Google Scholar and ResearchGate. So Google Scholar is essentially a search engine that's specialized to find scholarly literature. So it will eliminate things like news articles and things that are meant more for the general public. Um, so think so things like WebMD, Cleveland Clinic, and it will direct you to specific articles on, I guess, platforms like NIH or Wiley. And ResearchGate is also a great literature research tool. It's a social platform for researchers to share their publications. However, there is no requirement for articles to be peer reviewed. So um, we recommend that you carefully evaluate each source. So peer review is essentially when a group of scientists gives sort of their abstract or their paper to another group of researchers and asks them to review whether or not they believe their findings and their claims are accurate. So when there is a lack of peer review, it increases the chances of an article being inaccurate. And so obviously keep an eye out for that. And another data analysis tool that, oh, sorry, another literature research tool, no, another statistical software tool that we recommend that you use is Google Sheets. So essentially, it's good for basic calculations, or it's good for organizing data or making simple graphs, which you will likely need to do when you are developing your abstract calculation. Sorry, my Zoom lagged for a moment. Which slide were you guys last able to see?
We saw the calculations one with the Google Sheets and SPSS.
Oh, okay, thank you. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, great. So back to statistical software. So after literature research tools, obviously you want to look into statistical software as well. So Google Sheets is one really good sort of tool that you guys will be using. So it's a great way to organize data and make simple graphs. So for example, if you want to make bar charts or line graphs, etc., basic calculations are also very good when you're using Google Sheets. However, I believe you're not required to calculate things per se, but you will likely be looking at statistics in research articles, but you won't be required to actually know how to derive those statistics. And SPSS, I'm pretty sure you guys will probably not be able to use the software, so you don't have to focus too much on it. It's used for advanced statistical calculations, so like t-tests and ANOVAs and non-parametric equivalents. Those are the actual tests that researchers use to develop the statistics that you find on articles. But you're not expected to know how to use that, and it's just for your information. And you can also use SPSS for making complex visualizations as well. So now we'll pass it on to Ananya, who is our high school guest speaker for today.
Hi everyone, I'm really happy to be here with you all today to share just a little bit about my own research experience. And I know we've received such an amazing presentation by Tiffany on what research is, why it matters, and the process of how to conduct research. But I really hope today that with my short presentation, I can inspire you all in some significant way. But before we dive in deeper, just a little bit about myself. I am a rising senior in Ottawa. And at school, I am actually a part of a lot of leadership opportunities, which include being the lead organizer of the inaugural Asian Heritage Showcase at my school, where we really gave the Asian community a stage to really display their own culture and traditions. I've been a former page at the Ontario Legislative Assembly, which is essentially a program for high achieving students that want to learn more about politics and even work alongside members of provincial parliament and the Premier of Ontario. And now I've also developed a passion to become a neuroscience researcher, and I've also gained recognition from the Ontario's Education Minister, Harvard, and the Mayo Clinic for my neuroscience research, as well as my work in advocating for youth mental health. And so, a part of this presentation today is to convince you all that you don't need to abandon any of your extracurriculars or even leadership opportunities to be a researcher. There's often a misconception that being a researcher means giving up a lot of the activities that you may be doing in the school community or even in your local community. But part of my own experience as a researcher has been to actually use my research experience and tie that with a lot of my extracurricular activities. So I hope I can show you that in my presentation today. But in case we don't get to your questions at the end of the presentation, please feel free to email me. My email is right there on the slide, or you can even search for me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to dive in deeper with you. Next slide, please. So I know Tiffany already went through the nitty-gritty behind what research really is, but I just wanted to include my own perspective on why I think research actually matters. And as a high school researcher myself, I've really gained a lot of learning experiences, and that not only includes my experience with researching hands-on, but also being given the opportunity to interact with a lot of mentors, which include members of the PhD faculty. So, really, the sky is the limit in terms of researching and all the opportunities that you can gain from it. But of course, there are also real world applications to this. And I think the number one or the most common one that people usually think of is how medical students always use research in their own day to day life to build a competitive portfolio. But I also want to highlight that research isn't just limited to science. It can stem all the way to even history, for an example. We have so many journals worldwide that really focus on different kinds of fields and different kinds of topics. And history can even be one of them, like the Concord Review, for an example, is just an example. But for the sake of this presentation, as well as the STEM Buddies program, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the science aspect, just because my experience revolves more on the biology side. Next slide, please. So how I actually, started to develop a research profile was by following these steps on the slide right here. And I know that at least for me, when I was in grade 9 and I started to dive into the world of research, it was certainly something that was a little bit confusing, and it can get hard to really get established within that area. So I think you might have skipped a slide by accident. If you want to go back one. Yeah, there we go. So I really started by asking the right questions. And that's actually the number one step that everyone needs to get down, because unless you aren't curious yourself and you don't start asking questions about why things exist in this world, you're not going to get into that mindset. And that's actually what helped me in grade 9 start getting into research. And by doing that, you're going to want to synthesize multiple sources. And of course, you want them to be reliable. And I know Tiffany already went through some of the reliable resources that you can use. But personally, for me, the top two that I really like to use are PubMed and the National Library of Medicine. I think those two are certainly great tools to just get started for any student. And also, don't be shy to explore different fields of interest, because if you're not passionate about the topic you're researching, your research paper will not be strong, unfortunately. And that means you're going to want to try different areas of topics. You're going to want to formulate different research questions, and that's okay. And a good way to do this is by broadening your understanding of complex issues. And you can even make your research paper in the future, not even just with this program, by including interdisciplinary aspects into your paper. So, for an example, I'm an international baccalaureate student, and so as a senior, we're expected to write an extended essay, which is essentially a 4,000 word research report. And my topic's going to be on neuroscience, but I'm also going to be really including like elements of psychology into it. So I'm going to be dissecting the early detection of many neurological disorders through connectomics. And that is where my neuroscience aspect comes into play. But I'm also going to be talking about the ethics of using connectomics. And connectomics, just to give you guys context, is essentially mapping the brain and like the neurons. It's a 3D map of the neurons. And that's what allows scientists and researchers to detect like diseases such as Alzheimer's disease at early stages. So in stage 1, just like cancer. And we really need to talk about the ethics behind this as well. So that's something to just think about. You may want to talk about the ethics behind something in your own biology research paper, for an example. Next slide, please. So part of the research process that I always really recommend any of my peers or anyone that comes to me for advice is to start by formulating a topic and research question, which I'm sure you guys are already going to start or have already started. And then I like to always conduct some background research just so that I'm familiar with the topic before I start writing stuff on paper. And you want to do that obviously by accessing reliable resources. And I know that can be a little difficult sometimes just to cross verify what's reliable and what's not. But oftentimes, journals and papers that are verified by top universities or even educational institutions or any lab or hospital is generally the way to go. And then you want to start formulating a hypothesis, or I wrote, or multiple. And that's because when you start researching, you're going to have different ideas and different takes on how you might want to start dissecting your analysis or even start writing your research paper. And that's completely normal. I think generally speaking, when I start writing my research papers, I have around 4 hypotheses that I like to choose from at least. And depending on the type of field that you may choose, you might want to have 2 hypotheses in your research paper. And that can come in the form of a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis. So the null hypothesis is essentially something that agrees with your argument. So for an example, this is just a really basic research like question, but you might want to explore, like, let's say you talk about how does sunlight intensity affect plant growth? So your null hypothesis could be that as sunlight increases, plant growth also increases. So that's really that's essentially agreeing with that the fact that sunlight does have an effect on plant growth. But your alternative hypothesis could be that as sunlight increases, nothing happens to plants. Like they don't grow, they're stagnant. And that is what allows your research paper to be unbiased and not include your own opinions, but just some food for thought. And I always obviously like to conduct analysis in my research paper, but a good way to make your research paper even stronger is by considering any limitations. And if you're an IB student, you can relate to me really well on this, but normally in IB with any type of research paper, any type of essay writing that you do, you always talk about the benefits and the limitations. And even this applies to research as well. You want to talk about the limitations behind why your analysis might not be as accurate. And that's maybe something that you want to include in the evaluations section of your research paper, but that can definitely help the reader understand and contextualize how, because at the end of the day, we are high school students and we have limited resources. We're not some PhD expert that has access to so many labs. So it's definitely a good idea to highlight why your experiment might not be the most accurate. Next slide, please. And I just have some general tips. I know Tiffany went over how you can start formulating a research question, but this is something that I always use when I formulate my own research question. And it's just a little template that might help you guys if you're still having trouble with coming up with a research question. But I always like to think of it as, how does variable A, or like whatever variable you're working with, affect variable B within the context of whatever topic you're talking about, like biology, for an example. Health science is also another common topic that people choose. Or you might even dive deeper into some sort of case study. Like, let's say this wasn't a science research paper and more of like a business one. You might pick a case study off the internet. Next slide. And then, of course, I know we already went over evaluating research questions, but just another example for you guys. So a not so great research question would be, does social media affect mental health? So again, that's very ambiguous, it's very vague, and it's too broad. Like, it's not something that you would be able to properly analyze within one research paper. You'd probably need 2 or 3 to really get a better understanding of this question. So a more precise research question would be, to what extent does TikTok usage correlate with anxiety levels in grade 11 Ontario students during exam season? Now, the reason why this research question is a lot stronger is because you can see I've highlighted here that phrase, to what extent. And that is what emphasizes on the fact that we can talk about both the benefits and limitations of TikTok usage. And we've specified the social media platform. I haven't just said social media. I picked a specific one. I picked TikTok. And then we even have a specific target audience, or a control group, that we will be analyzing. And in this case, that would be grade 11 Ontario students specifically. And I even have a more clear time frame during exam season. So it's not too broad. It's not like the whole year. You have a specific time frame to work within. So just some food for thought when you come up with your research question. Next slide, please. So coming into my own experience with research, I actually started my passion for research in grade 9, and that came from the opportunity to work in a lab with PhD mentors at Carleton University in Ottawa. And this was funded by the Tiny Earth organization in the United States. And our mission over here was to help solve the antibiotic resistance crisis. So just some context for you all, we haven't come up with a new antibiotic in around 30 years. And so in the future, this will definitely be a significant problem if we don't start creating new drugs soon to help fight against bacteria and resistant bacteria specifically. So my partner and I, we conducted and we analyzed a lot of soil samples. And from there, we were able to test, and we actually created a research poster as well at the end of our term and presented it to PhD faculty. But we went through a lot of tests with these samples, so some of them being gram staining and the McConkey test. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but it's just to basically test how effective the antibiotic is. And we were actually able to find 2 new potential antibiotics, and they're now currently being investigated in labs within the United States. But that is where my research journey just began to start. Next slide, please. And then after grade 9, within a year or 2, I joined the Knowledge Society program, and there I specialized in neuroscience research, specifically by looking at the early detection of Alzheimer's disease. And my research paper actually got recognized by the Mayo Clinic, and from there I was able to gain mentorship by Professor Pellizer. And I'm very grateful to him because he is really what opened my eyes to the world of research and how vast this field is, how much more we can still dive deeper into, especially the field of neuroscience. There's so much left to be discovered. So if you're looking for a field specifically that has a lot of scope for research and you're into medicine, I feel like neuroscience is definitely a good place to start. And from there, my work didn't end with just the research paper. I moved on. I became the director of Neurominds, which is essentially a nonprofit organization that raises awareness for neurological disorders. And I helped younger students publish articles for the first time, start research paper writing. And that's actually where I started to build my passion for mental health. So, still within that neuroscience area, but as you can see, as my research journey progressed, I first started with something really broad with neuroscience. Then I went a bit more deeper with connectomics. And then again, I branched my way through to mental health. So there are numerous, like countless opportunities that you can get from just publishing that research paper. So don't let, like this, I feel like I'm just sharing this all, like this with you all to really get you motivated to just make that first step. And I think you guys already have with STEM Buddies, and it's an excellent program for you to actually get that research paper published. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, I did not give up any of my extracurriculars, and I actually just started to tie them in all together with my research. So, as senior executive of my school's MCAT club, I started hosting research paper workshops. I started working with my own peers, and together we published many research papers. Some research papers are still undergoing publication, but over here in the top two, images on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see me presenting my simulation, an algorithmic simulation of Alzheimer's disease, the degeneration or the neurodegeneration that patients face all the way from stage 1 to stage 10. And that's something that I supported with my own research paper. So maybe after STEM Buddies, if you want to enhance your research paper even more, you can take a step further. You can develop simulations, give your reader more context to what they're looking at. But that's something that I chose to do to support my Alzheimer's disease research paper. And then as my school's co-chair for our Relay for Life event, and that's essentially a cancer like awareness event that many schools do across Canada. And over there, I set up a booth that no one had ever basically created before. And that came from my experience as an intern at Neurora. And that's essentially a startup company in Canada, in Calgary, that really focuses on femtech. And over there, I raised awareness for PMOS. And for those of you that don't know about this condition, it's a condition that women face, numerous women face annually, and it actually increases the risk of acquiring endometrial cancer. So by raising awareness for this, I was able to collect more funds, and I actually leveraged my own research in this field of PMOS to support my booths, to talk to students and really educate people on what this condition really is about. And I actually also went further, and I also really leveraged my experience with research in terms of mental health. And I was able to create a mental health proposal for my school board in order to increase resources for mental health for high school students. We know that there's so many rigorous academic programs out there now today, and so many students face stress every day. So I thought it might be nice to give my school board, the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, a report on what's actually going on. I analyzed sleep patterns, depression patterns, stress, and even food intake within students, specifically grade 11 students. And this was actually recognized by my school board's research officer. So again, countless ways that you can apply your research in the real world. And you don't have to wait till you're in university. You don't have to wait till you have a PhD to do all these things. Next slide, please. And again, I just want to emphasize that I did not let my research really stay put like just in a research paper. I dived deeper. I started participating in essay competitions where I leveraged my research. So for the Harvard Crimson Global Essay Competition, I actually wrote a journalistic piece using my research paper in for youth mental health. And that in that like essay piece, I really focused on Toronto's like case study on how stress is impacting students. And then I went deeper into how that's impacting students globally. And then again, for the John Locke essay competition, I wrote a psychology essay, which wouldn't have been possible without my research in mental health and my neuroscience research. So again, you can use your research for other opportunities, other competitions like I did. in terms of journalistic competitions or even essay competitions. But I'm going to leave it there for now, and I'm going to open up the floor for any questions that you may have. And again, if we don't get to your question, I hope we do. Feel free to contact me or Tiffany. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Anya. It was amazing learning about all your research. This just proves to show that you don't have to be in university to get started on research. You can touch on so many important topics like mental health, Alzheimer's, antibiotic resistance. You really have such a broad scope of research up your sleeve, Anya. That's amazing that you're a high school student. I know those AIs and extended essays for IB are another level. So you're absolutely incredible for doing all that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the opportunity as well. And yeah, I just hope I can inspire at least someone today.
I'm sure we are all inspired. I'm inspired. So if you guys have any other questions, you can drop them in the chat. Otherwise, you are free to leave. Again, the session is recorded.
Okay, I see a question here in the chat. What was the process like to getting your first published piece of research? Did you look for opportunities shadowing via cold email? Yes. So actually, the number one, it was a bit of both. So I actually had a mentor at the Knowledge Society that really had contacts with many of the professors, but the Mayo Clinic professor, so Professor Pellizer, wasn't one of them. And so, to answer your question, yes, it was cold emailing. And I'm going to say right off the bat that if you don't have a strong email structure, for an example, you're gonna have to like email a lot of professors before you really get the right one that will want to mentor you. So if you want to avoid going through that, like I did not want to go through. I know a lot of people say that it's normal to email around 50 professors in a month. I just think that sometimes that can be time consuming. So you really, I think it's better to put a lot of time in finalizing your email template, for an example. And really, you don't want your email to be really long. So you want to keep it concise because you want to respect the professor's time as well. But just let them know that you respect them as well. And let them know why specifically you want to be mentored by them. Maybe a specific project or paper that they might have published really inspired you. But keep it concise. And yeah, that will hopefully let you gain some mentoring opportunities without having to email like 50 professors. I hope that answers your question. The second question, how did you make your Alzheimer's simulation? Yeah, good question. I actually used Python and I had to code my way through to making the simulation. So it was pure coding. Coding is actually something that I'm not good at. So it was the first time for me to code something like that. It was a lot of trial and error, but I really wanted something that would enhance my research paper. And I think that's part of why I gained recognition from the Mayo Clinic because it was something that was sort of unique, at least. At least for me, I haven't really seen many research papers where people include simulations specifically, but I think it was just nice to give readers that maybe don't have like a lot of knowledge in terms of Alzheimer's disease, for an example, for them to visualize how the progression of the connection between neurons and various brain regions, like how that connection really degenerates over time. So it was just a model that showed how the nodes and like the lines that were connecting them, it would dim over time from stage 1 to 10. And then third question, how did the Knowledge Society help you with your research journey? Honestly, I would really think of the Knowledge Society to be very similar to STEM Buddies in terms of research, in terms of that aspect, because in both programs, I think STEM Buddies does a better job in terms of really taking you guys step by step on how to formulate a research paper. But the Knowledge Society was more broad. It was something that I had to do on my own in terms of building my passion for research, specifically for neuroscience. But I think what really helped me specifically to answer your question was gaining exposure to various different kinds of topics. So I actually dove deeper into AI. I looked into health science, molecular biology, antibiotic resistance, and then neuroscience before I realized that I really wanted to focus on neuroscience. So I think one way that you can start your research journey, Katie, is just by looking at various kinds of topics that I talked about earlier and just really diving deeper into which one you're more passionate about. But you definitely don't need expensive programs to get you started on any research journey. And then, since you do have to pay some tuition, yeah, to participate in TKS, would you say it's worth the money? Okay, I think we're diverging away from research right now and like asking questions about that. Um, but it's really up to you. TKS was definitely a really good opportunity, but it was just one step out of like the millions of steps that I took on my journey to like research, and I think you can definitely be successful without the program. And I think you're already in STEM Buddies. I think if you're really passionate about research, that should be the way to go. But yeah, of course, it was a great program in terms of gaining exposure to different kinds of topics like AI, artificial intelligence, space tech, femtech, etc. So it's really up to you.
Any more questions? So it seems like I think those are all the questions for now. Thank you for answering all of those. Obviously, we have so many interested students. You really cultivated like an environment for curiosity. So I think it's such a great way to start our research program. Again, thank you to special thanks to Ananya for joining us today, and our operations coordinator Leslie for backing everything up with us and helping out with the slides as well. Thank you to all participants who came live today. And as always, if you have any questions, you can send them in the Discord, or you can send Ananya or Leslie or me an email, and you guys are free to go. The session should be recorded and that will be uploaded on our Google Classroom later.
Thank you. Bye, Tiffany.
Bye, Ananya. Thank you very much.